Hello and welcome to Career Stories, the podcast that shares other people's career stories to help you with yours. I'm Dr. Luella Forbes, and each week I sit down with leaders, experts and entrepreneurs to uncover the stories behind their careers. At the end of each month, I'm joined by Associate Professor Michelle Gander to explore how those conversations might help you on your career journey. Listen every Wednesday for the latest career story. Jo Lindsay is a Managing Director of Reed Talent Solutions, a part of Reed, the world's largest family-run recruitment business, which helps companies recruit across Europe, USA, the Middle East and Asia, as well as providing a range of complementing services like recruitment process outsourcing and learning services. Jo was my first proper boss as a 21-year-old and was the first person to really see me at work. I learned a lot from Jo that has helped me throughout my career, and so I'm really excited to introduce her to you today. Jo Lindsay, welcome to Career Stories.
Thank you very much, Luella. I'm not sure whether that's nice things that you've said about me or whether you've just made me sound really old, that I was your first boss when you were 21.
No, they're nice things. You weren't much older than me.
No,
you are much older than me. So your job is one of the managing directors of Reed Talent Solutions. I know you've got a range of responsibilities in that job. Perhaps you can start with the organisation first. What does Reed Talent Solutions do and who for?
So Reed Talent Solutions is a workforce solutions business. That means predominantly we support organisations with their hiring requirements. So sometimes that can be contingent worker focused, so temps, contractors, statement of work, so kind of into the consultancy space. And other times it can be permanent recruitment solutions, so organisations that are coming to us and asking us to basically recruit their staff on their behalf. In terms of markets that we operate in and who some of our customers are, we operate both across the public and private sector. We work with a lot of local authorities, for example, which gives us the opportunity to recruit a whole host of skills and types of roles, because you can imagine local authorities do everything from social care to financial planning, say, for example, for people. We also work heavily within the utilities space, so we work quite a lot with water companies, gas, electric, other utilities providers as well, which again gives us the opportunity to support in areas such as tech and engineering in particular.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's a really broad brush set of clients that we work with. Most of the clients we work with in Reed Talent Solutions are actually UK based, although obviously as the wider group we do operate in all of those territories and regions that you talked about. But my focus is very much on supporting UK hirers.
Yeah, fantastic. And so the difference between the Reed branch network and what you do is volume?
It is volume, but it's also the process. So you alluded to in your introduction that we do something called recruitment process outsourcing. Yeah. And that's very much where an organisation comes and asks us to be either part of their recruitment function or take on part of their recruitment journey for a candidate. So, for example, they might ask us to source candidates, select those candidates using things like psychometrics or interviews. They may ask us to onboard those candidates and reference and check those candidates, or indeed do any part of that process discreetly. The wider Reed business is probably what's more traditionally known as an agency model, where actually an organisation will come to them with a specific job and they will ask them to just source candidates for them. So it's very much about them doing the attraction and bringing the right people into the process rather than actually managing the process in its entirety for the customer. So that's the real difference between those two parts of the Reed business.
Yeah, fantastic. And so your role is managing director. But you're one of many multiple managing directors. Yeah. What's your specific area of responsibility?
So my specific area of responsibility is looking after our consultancy business. Now, from a consultancy point of view, we have two sort of key streams that we offer consultancy in. One, which for a business like Reed that has a rich heritage in recruitment probably doesn't come as a surprise, which is very much in a talent advisory space. Yep. So we're talking to organisations about things like their employer value proposition, for example. We're talking to them about maybe their equality, diversity, inclusion, belonging strategy. So really things that support their proposition and their employment proposition as part of a recruitment led or themed contract.
So how do you attract people?
Yeah, how do you attract people, retain people, develop people into roles within their organisation? The other area that we basically focus on from a consultancy point of view is actually in relation to digital change and transformation. So again, a lot of the projects historically that we've been asked to get involved in as a recruitment provider over the years have been things which actually supporting organisations with their tech hiring. And that tech hiring has really involved to sort of say, how can organisations outsource that element of that tech delivery? So rather than us just providing people, we can provide a wraparound service that says we don't just provide the people for a project, we can provide the project management office, for example. We can provide the risk and governance and compliance around that as well. So it becomes a much more outcome-driven project for a customer in terms of where they're spending their money than maybe a traditional contingent worker programme. The nice analogy I often use to explain it in simple terms is, imagine if you were getting your roof fixed at home, you wouldn't invite a builder up onto the roof and basically let him have a look and then charge you by the hour to fix the roof. You'd let him have a look at the roof and then you'd get a fixed price from him. And that's really the difference between how an agency model, again, would work in terms of temps and how our consultancy model would work. We're happy to fix the roof for a fixed price.
Yeah, fantastic. And Reed is interesting because it's a family-run business. It was founded by Alec Reed in 1960, and I was sorry to see that he passed away at the end of last year. And I know that his son James is now chairman and CEO. How do you think it being a family business kind of plays out in the workplace?
I think it brings a lot of positive traits to the business. And, one of the things we'll talk about later, obviously, is probably my tenure with the organisation as well. But it's primarily what it's brought to the business is one of the key reasons I've stayed. And I think one of the things we saw, and very prolifically during COVID, was that because it's a family-run business, effectively the shareholder group that it needs to deliver value to is actually the family itself. And therefore, it doesn't have a necessity, with a true PLC or perhaps with those VC-backed organisations, that it has to deliver either immediate shareholder value or shareholder value at the expense of long-term vision for growth. So what that meant, for example, in lockdown and during COVID times was actually the business was able to make decisions that were about the long-term stability and investment of that organisation. So you can imagine recruitment was hit really hard in terms of organisations they didn't have their existing staff in, let alone bringing in new staff. So, recruitment companies had to make a lot of cuts, and they made deep cuts, and the cuts weren't as deep in Reed as perhaps they were in some of the competitors. And what that meant in terms of bouncing back was that you're obviously in a position that we were able to respond when the market did come back, and it came back in anger kind of thing. We were able to take advantage of that. So I think that kind of long-term investment profile, I think is a good and a positive attribute of working for a family-run business. I think the other key thing for me is the fact that you're able to embody genuinely, I would say, and a lot of organisations look to deliver this, interestingly, through their EVP. They're looking to say, this is what we stand for, these are what our attributes are. And I think it's easier to do that when you've got that focused around the ethos of a family. And so I'll give you two examples where I think it plays out for Reed. First of all, in the fact that 18% of the business is effectively owned by a charitable trust. Yeah, so right. You're actually able to reflect that desire for philanthropy actually through the construct of your business, and do something that matters, and bring that to life actually for the people who worked in the organisation itself. So James likes to tell us, for example, that one day a week we all work for charity. I think the second thing that's played out, in terms of the attribute of the owner, and particularly Sir Alec and James, is the entrepreneurial spirit that exists within our business. And, that means that, we're not afraid to try new things, no such thing as a bad idea. And that makes it, quite a creative and innovative place to work. And I think, that again, is something that I think a lot of people aspire to, because, we all want to be challenged. We want to have fresh new ideas, new opportunities in our careers. And again, that's something that I think is particularly unique if that is the ethos of the family. And then you can reflect it in the actually how we live and breathe and work every day in our jobs.
Yeah, and I think the obvious example of that for Reed was reed.co.uk, which at the time was the first online recruitment platform in the UK, and you can see that kind of adventurous spirit in the decision to do that, and obviously that became a huge recruitment platform for the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it even predates me. I believe it goes back to 1995. So yeah, but yeah, absolutely that. And then later in its iteration, actually, as read.co.uk, it had a product as part of its portfolio that was called Recruitment. And that again was kind of on the face of it, sounds a little bit of a wacky idea where we actually allowed organisations to advertise their roles for free on our job platform. But what that obviously did was it actually built mass in terms of, that being the place to advertise your jobs, and was absolutely critical to then going on and commercialising that opportunity later. And I guess, that's an example of where, you can be a bit more fluid and make some different decisions again to that would possibly be made in a non-family run business with that shareholder or that VC return needing to be made.
Yeah, exactly. So what type of thing do you do each week?
So I talked about my role as looking after consultancy. I also look after our proposition to the marketplace, so our client engagement and client acquisition strategy, which is a very fancy way of saying sales. So my weekly activities range from everything from going on presentations or pitches to our customers for the types of products that I've previously described within our discussion today. I'm involved in setting the strategy for the business in terms of what markets we choose to progress in. So answering some of the classic questions in sales of where to play and how to win, for example. I manage the teams that actually deliver that on the day-to-day activities. So that both involves, if you like, technical support for those teams, but also pastoral care of those teams as well. So, lots of HR activity to support the people in those teams. And then on the consultancy side of things as well, I've got a big focus because that's a growing element for our business, actually, about setting the commercial strategy for that business. So again, thinking about, where our pricing strategy sits, for example, looking at different opportunities to manage our cost base more appropriately. So a good example would be this year we've had quite an interesting project on the go where we've looked at where we can offshore some of our roles to a new shared service centre, which we've opened in a place called Debrecen, which is in Hungary. So again, that's been a ongoing project in terms of, looking at, as I said, maximising our profitability in some of our operations as well. So it's a really interesting job because I get to do lots of different things. And probably something I should mention, just because I'm quite proud of it, is I have 2 children, and I've been supported, or lucky enough to be supported, with flexible working, which means I only actually work 4 days a week. So
amazing.
I try to juggle all of that in the 4 days a week that I have.
Yeah, fantastic. And in terms of the skills and capabilities you look for in your team, who makes up your team?
So on the consultancy side of things, we've got a mix of what I would call technical experts. So people who have genuine intellectual property in the types of projects that we deliver, and and that could be, for example, in discrete disciplines like project management on the IT side of things. It could be really technical expertise in the fact that they've worked with particular platforms before, say, for example, or they have particular skills around things like cloud infrastructure or cybersecurity or something like that. On the flip side, in the sales team, obviously we're looking for people who have an ability to storytell is probably what I would say, in terms of, it's not a transactional sale. You have to go out and identify in a consultative way what the client's problem is, and then be able to diagnose that problem and apply a solution from, what is a toolkit of solutions that we have as an organisation. So that ability to, show empathy to a customer's challenges, ability to build relationships, ability to position oneself as a partner of trust, they're all skills and attributes that I would look for in the sales function. So it's kind of 2 different sides of a coin, really. One is very technically based, and one is very sort of skills and kind of experience based as well.
I really like the description of storytelling there, because I think that's really important, because I think when you're doing sales, because I've obviously spent some time in consulting doing sales as well, what you're really doing is talking about the type of thing that you can do with somebody who needs a problem solving, and trying to figure out whether you can solve their problem for them. And if you can't, then you can't. But if you can, then you're kind of trying to tell them the story of how that might work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because obviously, and this will sit for you as well, when you're in that position where you're offering consultancy, you are the expert, you're bringing your intellectual property to the table. So your ability to frame that through the context of their problem is actually where, that fruitful consultancy relationship comes together. They've got a problem and actually you've got the means to solve that.
Helping them think about the things that they might not have thought of as well. So that's what you do now. Let's talk about how you got there. And you've already alluded to the fact that you've been at Reed for a long time. So before we get to how you joined Reed, what was it that you wanted to do when you were young?
When I was young, and this is going to sound a bit wacky now, considering where I've ended up, I wanted to be an astronaut.
I think that's brilliant.
And this idea of becoming an astronaut stemmed from a very cheesy 1980s movie called Space Camp, where
Fantastic.
They accidentally launched a load of kids into space on the shuttle. And I just got absolutely obsessed with this movie. And then I was lucky enough to go on to holiday to Florida when I think I was about 12. And I visited the Kennedy Space Center. And I was just in awe of it all. It was just absolutely amazing. And that was my ambition at that point in time, is that I wanted to go to space.
I love it. So that didn't work out for you though.
No. And to be fair, I probably didn't take the right A-levels, was part of the challenge. I'm not sure they're ever going to take someone to space with A-levels in history, economics and French. It was probably not a career-defining choice there.
So did you go to university?
I did. I went to university and studied economics. I chose economics because it was I think a good generalist degree. And also, if I'm honest, I was pretty inspired by the teacher I had at A-level. So it was kind of like, I'd really enjoyed the subject. So it kind of ticked 2 boxes, and, it felt like it was, as I said, a general degree, but one that would be, regarded in enough esteem that it wouldn't preclude me from doing any roles outside of vocational roles that you already make that decision if you're going to do those types of courses at university. Yeah,
pretty flexible, I think. So then when you left university, what happened?
So I left university and I'd applied for quite a few roles on graduate schemes in sort of like, the winter time when those kind of applications had to be in. Again, I'm showing my age now. All of those applications were paper application forms. So there was lots of filling in of personal statements and that kind of thing in very small handwriting to be able to get
Squeeze the words in.
Yeah, get everything down into a really small space. And for whatever reason, and I really don't know why now, I'd had my head turned by HR, and quite often, and I don't know if this is still the case really, but quite often you were asked to pick a stream when you applied for a big graduate program. So it was kind of like, do you pick to go into the IT stream, or do you pick to go into the HR stream? And I felt HR was something I wanted to do, and I'd done a bit of investigation into the professional qualifications in the HR world, which is obviously the CIPD qualifications, and and that felt like a good next step as well. So those were the kind of roles that I started applying for, and I wasn't successful. It was a very competitive time. So we're talking 1997. It was kind of a bit of a watershed moment, I think, for the economy. Obviously, we just had the election of, the Labour government. Things were really changing. So there was a step change in terms of, the market as well. But it was still very competitive. We were coming out of what had been a difficult time, I think, for unemployment, and particularly for young people getting their first step on the job ladder in the mid-90s. I then started to look, I guess, a little bit further afield. And one of the things that then appealed to me, I applied for the Reed graduate programme. So it was a graduate programme I applied to at Reed, was that it had a HR element to it, in the fact that they were going to sponsor me for a CIPD qualification, which was really appealing, so I could see some sort of long-term value to it. But interesting, it was a 3-year programme and it had 6-month placements within it. And all of a sudden that opened my eyes up to maybe I didn't know whether I wanted to do HR or not. And maybe actually this was a great opportunity because it would give me the opportunity to try out other specialisms and activities. So I applied to that and I was successful in getting a place on that graduate programme. So I sort of had I suppose a summer of excitement where I did a bit of travelling and whatnot, and then knowing that obviously I was coming into a job to start in the October after I finished uni in the June.
So normally in this bit, I ask people how they ended up in the job they are now, and people talk about moving to different organisations. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's not been the case for you. You've stayed in the one organisation all the time. So I am interested to know kind of what your path was. Perhaps you can also talk about what has kept you at Reed.
Yep.
Over that time. I know you've talked a little bit about values and how important that's been to you. So you joined as a grad and you did your 6-month rotations. Were there any of those that you particularly loved? There
was one I loved, which was where I actually ended the graduate scheme in sort of month 3, I think, of the 3rd year. So I kind of did two and a bit years on the graduate scheme. And the one I ended up loving was project management, which in a way tells its story actually about the grad scheme, why I've stayed at Reed and the thing I loved. And what I enjoyed about the grad scheme was, and what appealed to me was this idea of you could do 6 different things. So you weren't in the same role and you weren't facing the same challenges every day. Project management is exactly that. A project can be anything. So mostly today, and I can remember a project that you and I worked on, we were helping or setting up a project for people in Scarborough that built buses to basically retrain and move into new jobs because that wasn't going to be an opportunity going forward. And then mostly the next week I could have been, setting up and designing a recruitment process for a large retail bank. Or another project I worked on was the establishment of another one of the Reed brands, which is Reed in Partnership, which at the time was predominantly a welfare to work programme. So, there was lots of stuff to do and a project could be anything. So that was really attractive to me as an individual.
And I'm smiling because that's why I love working in projects too. The variety that you get, the challenge and the fact that the project's always in a different state. So, you start something and the work you need to do is different than the work you need to do in the middle and the work you need to do in the end. Like it's different every single day.
It is different every single day. And I think the thing that also appealed to me at Reed, and it's kind of almost a little bit of a, I don't know, it hides the fact that I've only ever worked with one organisation since I joined as a graduate. But each of those projects in a Reed sense was actually with a different client. Some of the clients I've had the opportunity to work with have been as wide-ranging as Vodafone, Royal Mail, Barclays as an organisation, a large number of the London boroughs, for example, worked with on implementation projects for some of their contracts. So, more recently, people like the Greater London Authority and Transport for London. So I've almost had the opportunity to partake in other organisations' projects and in their culture, but actually from, the home that has been Reed for me. And again, if you put that down to why I've stayed at Reed, then it's kind of like I've had so many different jobs at Reed, which again is partly to do with the culture that I outlined in the first place, which is one of entrepreneurism, and therefore, because we're always trying to do new things as an organisation, those opportunities have always presented themselves. And because I've genuinely found it such a great place to work, it's kind of like if all of those needs are being satisfied, those, whatever you want to call it, what is it, Maslow, and he's kind of, you need food and water.
Of needs,
and then you need self-actualisation. That's something that Reed has offered me. It has offered me that career progression. It has offered me the opportunity to learn, to try new things. And then, as I said, be part of a great place to work with a great culture.
And one of the things that I have been thinking about in terms of staying in an organisation is what I would call sponsorship, which is kind of the person above you who helps you find new opportunities and helps you grow in your role. Mm-hmm. Have you had a good sponsor or good sponsors?
I've had good sponsors. I can think of one in particular when I was relatively early in my career, and he was a senior director within business, and he came on a visit to our office, an office you probably would know well, Luella, because it was in Coventry.
Yeah.
And, he just started talking to me about what I'd been doing and what projects I'd been working on. And then around about 2 or 3 weeks later, he called me and asked me to go and work on a new project, internally focused this time, which was actually about growing and professionalising what our shared service centre model was at the time. And it's just kind of like, he called several times during my early career in Reed and offered up new opportunities for me because, obviously he, a little bit like you said in our introduction, I think he saw me for what I could be and what I could grow into kind of thing. So I think, definitely having people like that early in my career was really important. I think that sponsorship changes as you progress through your career because I think you are obviously judged more so in terms of what you've actually delivered rather than future capability. And, some of the opportunities that have presented themselves later in my career have really come about because people have known that I've done a good job in something similar before or been able to kind of segue into something else. So, for example, when I first picked up running our consultancy business, that was something I'd never done before. It was literally a call out of the blue to say, look, this opportunity presents itself. This is what we need you to do. Is this something that you'd be willing to have a go at, for want of a better word? And it's kind of, I think if you seize those challenges, you create opportunity for yourself as well.
Yeah. Absolutely, I completely agree. So when we met, you were, so you'd kind of taken that HR project role kind of one step further and you were leading the client projects. Mm-hmm. And that was when I joined and we worked together for a few years. I forget how many now. It was a long time ago.
A few, I think.
Yeah. A few years. And then you went on to become director of projects. So you kind of grew that part of the business. Is that right?
Yeah. So and interestingly, that director of projects role had two focuses again. Then it took on responsibility for, again, the governance and project management of any projects that we were doing from, in fact, at that point, both the Reed and the Reed Talent Solutions business to customers. But it also included an internal project management function as well, which was actually about pushing through, in particular, IT change projects that the business had at the time. So we were doing, like, for example, a wholesale refresh of the desktops in our business at the time. And, the nature of our business meant that we have a lot of offices and a lot of locations back then, lots of sort of like shops.
Physical branches.
Physical offices kind of thing. So we'd take on projects like that. So that project role was really about... I don't know. I always say as project managers, a lot of organisations, do have job titles that are things like senior project manager or, executive project manager or something like that. But in reality, for me, the career path in projects is more likely to follow the position that, the more senior you get, the larger and more complicated the projects actually become, not just actually, you move up a linear career path. So, that for me was kind of the climax of that project management role, was being responsible for the overall portfolio of projects. And then to kind of move on from that, sort of like the next role I did was a complete sideways move then into sort of saying, well, actually, you've delivered the content of some of those external projects. Actually, do you want to lead the business that is responsible for that? Via a sort of a brief world for probably about 2 years, which I think was after you left, where I was actually selling some of the solutions then. So it was kind of, again, now if I look back at the life cycle of a customer with Reed Talent Solutions, we will acquire them, we will implement them, we will manage them, and hopefully we will then land and expand our services to develop a longer trading relationship with them. And the roles that I've had since then have basically been all of those. So I've seen the whole life cycle from acquisition to, strong, long-lasting, trusted partner status being achieved.
Yeah, fantastic. How do you make sure that you don't get bored being in one organisation? Because quite often the reason that people look for a new job is that they might have been bored or feel a bit frustrated or something with a role that they're in.
I can honestly say I've only ever had one job in Reed where I've been frustrated with it. And I was never bored because it was too busy to be bored, to be honest. I think that was, maybe one of the challenges. And that was when I was in a role leading the account director and account management function. And I became frustrated in that role because a lot of my role became around remedial activity.
Yeah,
and the thing that was frustrating about that wasn't the remedial activity in itself, because, things always go wrong and, you strive to put them right for customers. It was more about the fact that the team I had working for me was so good that by the time it got to me as an escalation or an issue that needed to be solved, it was almost an unwinnable brief to solve it, because, we'd had some really great people that had been, trying to do this and, make it really bring it to life for your listeners. It could be something as simple as, we weren't able to recruit in a particular locale for a customer because actually their salary was £10,000 less than the other 10 competitors on the same out-of-town business park, for example, recruiting for the same role. And,
there's nothing you can do about that,
There is nothing you can do about it. And that's the only role I can say I ever got frustrated to, but it's okay, because I felt it was difficult to make a difference because, as I said, by the time it got to me, it was an unwinnable brief. And that was difficult because everybody wants to do a good job, and knowing that you can't do a good job for things that are outside of your control is maybe difficult. I think, back to your question about being bored, I think I've been proactive in searching out new activities or new opportunities within Reed. So I haven't waited for them to come to me. So, and as I said, I'm lucky that it's the type of organisation that fosters that environment. But I know, from speaking to, friends and colleagues and stuff, if you're not in that environment and you don't have that opportunity, then, I can understand why people would choose to go and look elsewhere to make their time more interesting. I think the other thing that is, as I said, I've already mentioned this, but I think one of the things that keeps it fresh at Reed is because it's a customer focused organisation, and in the roles I'm in, I'm quite heavily invested in those customers and involved in those customers. It's kind of every time you've got a new customer, there's new stuff.
And there's new work.
There's new work, there's new people, there's there's just new ways of doing things, there's new technology. So it's kind of like, that I just like to consume information, I think.
And I'd imagine that one of those areas of interest at the moment for you and your team would be around AI.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can have a day in recruitment at the moment that doesn't, have some sort of mention of AI. I mean, every, industry conference that you go to is peppered with AI across the piece. I think it's really interesting because I think, so not in the UK, but in the EU, they've actually enacted a piece of legislation where they've talked about how AI should be adopted. And one of the high risk and highly regulated areas that they've focused on has been the use in recruitment and in hiring decisions. So, I think that probably sets the tone even before you sort of look at the marketplace in terms of the kind of like cacophony of solutions that are on offer for different parts of recruitment for AI. It kind of sets the tone that actually, AI is going to be a big thing for recruitment. I think there's a lot of confusion in our industry about whether it's AI or process automation, I think. So there's definitely a sort of a grey bulge in the middle, shall we say, of where those two things cross. And then I think it's quite, there's two other aspects to it for me that are quite interesting. One is the ethical stance of it. So ethically, where does or should AI sit in a hiring decision? And at the moment, you're genuinely starting to see a real kind of like, the AI is marking its own homework. So the candidates are using AI to apply for jobs, and the employers and the RPO firms are using AI to screen the jobs. It's at what point is a person being screened by a person anymore, or is it just AI, as I said, marking AI's homework?
I feel a little bit like that. I do marking for a university assignments, and for a while it felt like my job was not marking the assignments but playing detective to see if somebody had used AI to answer the assignments, if you know what I mean. So my energy was spent on, instead of figuring out whether the student understood what they had been taught, my energy was spent on figuring out whether they had used AI to demonstrate that they understood what they had been taught, which just kind of felt a bit counterproductive. But these things are evolving so quickly as well. Yeah. And that's that's a challenge and an opportunity, I think.
It is, and you know, it's kind of, I suppose none of us want to sound like a Luddite kind of thing. So, you know, there is that. But equally, it's kind of, you know, as you said, the opportunity is huge. And, you know, the opportunity will present itself in terms of, you know, there will be jobs that go on to exist that just aren't even thought of now. So, you know, I think it's just, it's changing fast, but it is going to change. So, you know, you're going to have to accept that and get with the programme.
Well, you know, you talked about paper applications before. I remember, you know, in the early days of the internet, God, I'm going to sound so old. But in the early days of the internet, you know, everybody was worried about what that would mean for jobs, that you put jobs online or instead of kind of going into a branch, and, you know, everything survived and it just changed. I mean, it does. I mean, you know, even now, you know, the element, particularly for our agency recruiters, that's important is kind of like the personal nature of the service that they offer. I think the other interesting thing that, you know, is not emerging, but is kind of obvious really when you think about it, is, you know, so much of the job market is actually passive, particularly when you're talking about, you know, the sort of, although, you know, we've you know, there's been some negative connotations around the unemployment rates, etc. But there are still plenty of industries and sectors where actually we're still in a skills shortage. And, you know, how does AI find those passive candidates if they don't want to be found? They're not applying for jobs. It's, you know, so that's a different use of AI where actually, you know, a bot reaching out to you to ask you if you're interested in this particular role when you've shown no intent to apply for a role, how effective is that compared to somebody who understands that market and understands your person and your skills? So, you know, there's probably an example of where AI can do the heavy lifting in terms of finding that individual, but you'd still want to personalise that outreach to them, you know, not necessarily using, for example, agentic AI or anything like that. It would still need to be a person. So, yeah, as I said, I think it's kind of, it's here. We're using it every day in you know, what we do within our business. And it's what else does it then allow you to do, or what does it allow you to do better? Yeah. Okay, so some more general questions about your career then. What are the strengths that you think have helped you be successful?
Agility and flexibility. So again, going back to probably the different roles that I've had and even my first, as I described, my desire to actually apply for a HR role, but then, you know, moving the dial on that to actually apply for roles or a role that had multiple rotations in it from a graduate point of view. So I think that ability to kind of, to live in a world of change and see that change as a positive thing, I think that's been important for me in terms of those attributes. I've always worked hard. I know it sounds a bit old-fashioned, but, you know, I've always tried to do the best job that I can do. I don't really see the point of setting out to do a task if you're not going to try and do it to the best of your ability. And I think the other thing for me that probably defines me as a person, and I would hope, again, if any of my colleagues were listening to this, they would say that as well, is I like to bring my authentic self to work. And, you know, that's my brand. It's kind of like what I stand for, as in, and I think people who work with me or who've worked for me know that, as in, you know, they may not agree with me all the time, or I might not agree with them, but, you know, I'm a trustworthy person that, you know, as I said, what I say or the actions I take is, as I said, you know, that's kind of my thing. I want to be authentic.
Yeah. And I think I would add a sense of commerciality to that. Like, I think you are good at thinking about what is going to be important to customers. I think that was one of the things that I took away from when we worked together, is how do you put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and think about what they need?
I could see that certainly from the projects we worked on together. I could see how that could come across. And yeah, I'd probably agree with that.
How do you manage your mental health or kind of stress? Because you must have stress in your job.
I have stress in my job. I have stress in my home life with 2 children keeping me on my toes. one thing I alluded to this earlier. I would work a 4-day week. Friday for me is almost kind of a stock take day. So it allows me to catch up on all of the stuff that I've not done in my house, for want of a better word. House whiffery is not one of my top skills. I have sometimes hung washing on the line for so long that spiders have built webs in it. So, that's a big part for me in terms of, making sure that I can get on top of my home life on a Friday, which then enables me actually to spend the weekend with my kids and do stuff of value kind of thing. The other thing I do on a Friday is I go swimming, and I just find that is just some real me time, and it's kind of, and I think swimming is one of those low impact sports, should we say, that actually it gives you time to think as well, and it's kind of, I have some of my best thinking moments, I think, when
it's quite meditative.
It is, and also I'm not cut out for other sporting activities, so it's certainly something that helps. That just that day for me is as I said, it's like a stock take in the week. It just allows me to reset both at home and at work.
And you talked a little bit about it, but how has being a parent impacted the way you work? Obviously, other than you're doing 4 days a week.
I think it's probably linked to the 4-day-a-week thing. It's helped me procrastinate less about doing stuff because I have less time to do stuff in. So you have to be really focused and say, right, if I can only do 4 things today, what are the 4 things I'm actually going to do? And I'm actually going to do them speedily. And as I said, not sit and procrastinate about that. And I think that's because, when you have a child, they do become a key part of your life and a key priority. And, the world doesn't stop because you've got a tender to do, for example. But equally, the child doesn't still need you to help them or to care for them or to look after them or kind of thing. So I think that more focused and less procrastination has probably been the 2 immediate impacts. I think the other thing that, having children does, it's a bit like when you buy your first house, I guess, as well. It anchors you in terms of, there are other now little humans that depend on you for their lives, so when you're talking about the world of work, that's kind of an important consideration as well in terms of, you want to provide for them, and, the employment that you have has to be able to do that.
Yeah. And kind of linked to all of that, what does work-life balance mean to you?
I've thought about this quite a lot, actually, and probably since COVID, but work-life balance for me, if I had to sum it up, means being there when my kids get up in the morning and being there to put them to bed at night. And I didn't have that pre to COVID, but I didn't realise I didn't have it. And when we all started working from home, and my daughter was just coming up to 2, so she was 2 in the July of 2020, and I spent time and did things with my daughter that I never did with my son, because I was switching my computer off at 6:00, but then I was there, I was present. I wasn't spending 2.5 hours commuting home from London and arriving back after he'd gone to bed, which was one of the reasons I pursued the 4-day-a-week thing. It was so that I actually had quality time with him, kind of thing. But as I said, I didn't actually realise that. So for me, as I said, if I could talk about, lots of, contextual things about work-life balance. But for me, that important thing about am I there when they get up in the morning and am I there when they go to bed? That's a real big thing for me.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is how our upbringing has shaped our career. Do you have any thoughts on how your upbringing might have shaped what you've ended up doing?
I don't think it did shape what I did as a career. So to put it into some context, my dad was an electrical engineer and my mum was a credit controller. So, I haven't had
neither of those.
I've not followed either of those. I think the 2 things it probably has shaped me as a human being is that affinity to home life that I've just talked about. I had a very happy childhood and some wonderful, lovely memories from that. And, I wanted to recreate that for my kids. And And I think going back to something I said about always wanting to do a good job and work hard, that was pretty much instilled at me from an early age. I mean, I was fortunate that I did quite well at school academically, but that was because I was, encouraged to. And I think that's probably followed on into how I've approached work. So not necessarily the career path I've taken, but certainly the kind of, the attributes again that we've talked about that I've applied to my career.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, so some quick fire questions.
Okay.
What is your tea or coffee order?
Oh, the most boring drink you can possibly order. Decaf black Americano.
All right. Would you rather work from home or work from the office?
A mix, if I can say both.
You can pick, yeah. Are you an early bird or a night owl?
A night owl. I'm not at my best before. In fact, I often say to my colleagues at work, if you want to get one over on me, ask me a question before 10 a.m.
Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I think I'm an introvert, but I don't know whether other people would say that about me.
I think that's what people would think about me as well, because I think I'm an introvert, but I don't know that people would say that about me. Do you prefer using Microsoft Word, Excel or PowerPoint?
Word.
What's your communication style? Do you prefer email, a Teams message or a phone call?
Ooh, probably depends what I'm communicating. If I'm communicating to my colleagues at work, I'm quite fond of a Teams message because I like the immediacy of it and the informality of it compared to an email. But if I've got something really important to say, I'll always go for either a phone call or a Teams call or something where I can see how they react to it.
Is there a book or a leader who has shaped your thinking about your career?
I don't think there's a single one. I did read like years and years ago, and it really resonated to me. Partly, I think, because it was the first book I ever read in that sort of management genre. I remember reading Good to Great, and it was kind of like, wow, that's kind of like it's such a simple concept, but something to get behind. So
I loved that one as well.
Yeah. Maybe that one in terms of like just more general thinking, but I wouldn't say I've taken my inspiration from any one individual.
What is the best piece of career advice you've been given?
Ooh. Never turn down an opportunity before you've explored it. And also, I would say, and this was said to me when I was doing I had a lady that was acting as a mentor for me. She said the difference between men and women when they're looking at new jobs or new opportunities is the women focus on the 5% of the job they can't do rather than the 95% they can do. And men are the other way around. And it's kind of like, I think, again, going back to that not turning down an opportunity is probably, it's probably true.
Yeah. And finally, what are you proudest of in your career?
Ooh, what am I proudest of in my career? I think probably, and it may be because it's. Well, actually, can I pick two?
Of course.
Pick two. So probably because it's of the moment. So the business that we've been building, or myself and a colleague, I'll give him a shout out now, James Bridgeland, have been building around our technology solution and our talent advisory practice and other parts of it we've not discussed today, such as services procurement. And we've been working together over the last 10 years on that as a project, and it's really come to fruition in, I would say, the last couple of years. I'm really proud of that because that's something that we started together and have grown together and built together, and it's I don't know, when something's successful in that space, it's like having a child and being proud of it. I'm proud
That's
of
really
what we've built. I think on a personal level, one of the things I've also been most proud of in my career is a particular contract that we won, which was for the Greater London Authority. And, again, it was a huge collaborative effort across Reed. All parts of it involved everybody from like the IT department, the finance department, all the salespeople involved, the operations team that shaped that. And, I wouldn't have said we were nailed on to win that. I think we had to do that storytelling that we referred to earlier in that contract. It was a long burner. We were working on it for several years in terms of developing that relationship. So to get that call when you're successful and you've put all that time and effort into it, it was kind of that was a warm, fuzzy, proud feeling that day.
Yeah, fantastic. Jo Lindsay, thank you for sharing your career story today.
Thank you, Luella, for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe in your podcast app. It helps other people find us. And join me and Michelle Gander at the end of the month for our reflections on this conversation and the rest of this month's career stories. This podcast was produced on Noongar country. We acknowledge and respect the first storytellers of this land and the keepers of culture, and extend that respect to traditional owners and storytellers wherever you may be listening.